All right. Thanks, everybody. This session is titled New Jersey. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sierra Club Pennsylvania Chapter Conservation Fall Webinar Series. This session is titled New Jersey Offshore Wind and is hosted by the chapter's Clean Energy Conservation Team. My name is Jim Wiley, and my volunteer role in Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter is as the Conservation Vice Chair. Before I introduce today's speakers and today's topic, let's do a little housekeeping. I've muted everyone. No, I'll say please mute yourself for the duration of the presentation until we get to the Q&A session. You're invited to introduce yourself with your name, county, or town in the chat. You can either ask questions in the chat or we can have time for discussion at the end of the speaker's presentation. If a question seems like a clarifying question, like what does that acronym mean, I might interrupt the speaker just to get clarification. So the elephant in the room is what happened Tuesday and Wednesday, right? I appreciate that. We're all processing that. I don't really feel equipped to have a group therapy session that I think maybe we all need. But hopefully the election results will inform some of the questions and discussion that we have today for sure. So thank you for those considerations. All right, let's get started with today's program. As I said, I'm Jim Wiley. My guest speaker today is Denise Brush, who's the Offshore Wind Committee co-chair for the Sierra Club New Jersey chapter. So I'll talk more about this at the end, but this is, to put this in context, this is a one webinar in a series of 7 we're having this fall. You can learn more about these at that link. I'll share more about the upcoming webinars at the end of the presentation and encourage you to sign up for those, and we'll be creating a library of the recordings. All right. With that, I'm going to stop share and let Denise take over.
Yeah. I'm going to mute myself. Hi, I'm Denise Brush, and I'm going to be talking about clean energy and offshore wind today. And I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be starting in a moment when I get it all set up. So let's see, we're going to do share the screen and make sure we can watch videos because I do have a video. And then we'll start from the beginning. Right. All right. Is everyone seeing it? Hello?
Yes, that looks good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Give it a
Great.
thumbs up, but I don't think you can see me.
No, I can't. Okay. So, all right. So I've been chair of the New Jersey chapter of the Offshore Wind Committee for 3 years now. And I recently took on a co-chair because it's getting to be such a big job. And so I'm a volunteer with the Sierra Club of New Jersey, and I'm also not retired yet, although I'm looking forward to retiring in January. So this is all keeping me busy, but it's very exciting, and I will talk to you about it. The thing to know about New Jersey is that we have a governor currently, Phil Murphy, who has many ambitions around renewable energy, which is wonderful. He was elected in 2017, and then he was reelected in 2021. And one of the first things he did was develop a state energy master plan. And the BPU is the Board of Public Utilities for the state of New Jersey, and they're very much on board with his renewable energy goals. So initially he set a goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. And a couple years later, he lowered it to 2035. So that's the set of goals we're working under right now for 100% clean energy. The Energy Master Plan is very comprehensive. It includes much more than offshore wind. It includes community solar, building electrification, putting in more charging stations all over the state, all kinds of things. And it was developed with public input. I did speak in Camden. I think they had one in the south of the state and one in the north of the state. I live near Camden. And so that was my first experience speaking at a public event. But the Energy Master Plan is wonderful. And then they began implementing it using executive orders initially. But then Governor Murphy also worked with the legislature to create bills about specific topics within the Energy Master Plan and provide funding. So this has been happening for, I guess, almost 8 years. So it's going pretty well. So there's a number of initiatives that have been launched. Offshore wind development, of course, I'm going to be talking more about. But we also have a community solar program, which is I don't know if you guys know about community solar, maybe you do. I won't go into it too much. And also incentive programs for rooftops for single family houses. They have a thing called solar ready warehouses, where when someone puts up a new warehouse, it has to be ready for solar. It doesn't have to have solar, but when it's built, it has to be prepared for the idea that in the future they may have to have solar. There's been a lot of work done both by the state and within the Sierra Club about building electrification. And there's a lot of electric vehicle charging stations that have been going in. Another thing that the New Jersey chapter has been working on a lot is electric school buses. And they've rolled out some fleets of electric school buses in some of our municipalities. And there's been a gradual shutdown of various fossil fuel plants and nuclear power plants within the state as well. So there's currently only one nuclear plant that's still going, which is down here in the southern part of the state. So as far as offshore wind development in New Jersey, there was a strategic plan, which I've put the link to here. If you want to check it out, it's pretty comprehensive, and I think this has been extremely helpful in terms of successful rollout of offshore wind in the state. So the state of New Jersey does have some great assets in terms of offshore wind development. They have a long coastline, and also they have a wider than usual continental shelf. So you can really only build offshore wind on the continental shelf. If it gets, beyond that, it's too deep. So you would have to have like a floating turbine as opposed to embedded in the ground of the ocean. And then there happen to be fairly strong offshore winds. And it's located central with the East Coast electric grid. We also have a tradition of very strong trade unions in the state. And we have specifically the IBEW, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So they have a very large presence. And then, of course, we have the support for climate change mitigation from the state leadership, not only the governor and his administration, but there's the assembly, the legislature is also They've been doing a lot for it as well. So I guess they're Democratic controlled on both sides. So the state, like I said, has come up with a strategic plan and goals. Um, so they're motivated by three main things in terms of the decision to develop offshore wind: fighting climate change, reducing air pollution, and creating jobs in New Jersey. So the initial renewable energy goal was set at 7,500 megawatts by 2035. And then a couple of years later, it was upgraded to 11,000 megawatts. So that's the current state goal, is 11,000 megawatts by 2035. And offshore wind projects do take a long time, so you really have to plan ahead in terms of, if you want to have something happen by 2035, well, you got to start now. So there's various projects that have happened in New Jersey in terms of offshore wind. You've probably heard about some of them, but I put them basically in how close they are to completion. So the first one was Ocean Wind 1 and 2, and that was going to be actually starting construction this year. Unfortunately, it was canceled a year ago. So it was to be developed by a Danish company called Ørsted, which has a lot of experience in offshore wind projects in Europe. And unfortunately, they decided that because of all the supply chain issues after the pandemic and so on, that it was no longer economically feasible. So then we had Atlantic Shores 1 and 2, and this project is still going. It's made it through the environmental impact phase, still on its target, and they recently had their construction and operations plan approved. This was within the last few months. And there's two projects, but they're sort of right next to each other. They both connect into the grid through Atlantic City. And total, they'll be producing 1,510 megawatts. And then more recently, we've had attentive wind and leading light wind, which are two projects that would be a little more centrally located along the Jersey Shore. So there's a place called Seagirt, which is where there's a New Jersey National Guard training center. And so that being state-owned land is a good place to bring the cables on shore. And so that project, or those two projects, which are kind of paired up, they're both in the public hearing phase right now, and they are finalizing their transmission plans. And then finally, the ones that are kind of the farthest off, there's several lease areas. I want to say maybe as much as a half a dozen lease areas that are being proposed for offshore wind projects in an area called the New York Bight, which is kind of between New York City and Long Island, kind of in that area. And so if that, makes it all the way through all the processes, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, there's multiple projects. So that's going to be a major factor in getting to that renewable energy goal of 11,000 megawatts. So I found this summary on one of the developer sites. There's a coalition of offshore wind developers in New Jersey, kind of a industry association. I've attended some of the presentations. I believe this is actually a screenshot for one of the presentations that someone from that organization gave. So taking the three currently going, developments, Atlantic Shores and Attentive Energy and Leading Light. Those three are going to have the potential to power 2.3 million New Jersey homes. They're going to have a total economic impact of around $8.7 billion. And all three of them do have community benefit programs. So they are required as part of this agreement with the state that they have to fund programs for workforce development and for research to benefit the communities where they are going in. And each of the projects has also made a commitment to using union labor, and I should say local union labor as well. So it has to be New Jersey based. And all three of the projects have committed to what's called marshaling. So assembling the product, the turbines at the New Jersey Wind Port in Salem, which is along the Delaware River in South Jersey, and also to producing or procuring monopiles. So, the tower that the wind turbine sits on, from the manufacturing facility at the Port of Paulsboro, which is just south of Camden. So as part of this whole state process, the State Economic Development Authority is working with private companies to develop two ports in New Jersey. One of them is called the New Jersey Wind Port, and that's going to be in Salem County. I shouldn't say going to be, it is. It's already there, and they're doing work. And the reason they chose that location is because it's south of the Delaware River bridges, right? So when they put the turbine on a ship and send it around to the the Jersey Shore, it wouldn't be able to fit under any of the bridges. Is what the situation, right? So they have to pick a location where they can ship the turbines from, and that wouldn't run into a bridge. So what they do at the New Jersey Wind Port is that they do something called staging or marshaling of the turbines. So these things are huge. I have a slide in a little while that shows kind of what they look like. But they're really, really hot, really tall. And so I think they've been compared to the Statue of Liberty. And so they have all these large pieces that they have to put together, right? And so it's a pretty large land area in a rural part of the state where they're able to have room to just put all these large pieces that are waiting to be shipped, and then they can put them on the ships and send them around. I bet my thing is blocking this. All right, so and then we have the Paulsboro Marine Terminal, and formerly that Paulsboro area was used for shipping oil out, and it's in Gloucester County, New Jersey, again on the Delaware River, near Camden, in more industrial area. There's a lot of people in the trades that live in that area already, and so locating it there is good for both the process in terms of the location, but also a way to keep those trades jobs in state and to generate more jobs. And so what they do at the marine terminal is they manufacture and fabricate and assemble the wind turbine monopiles. Like the blades and the rotors and so on. Some of that stuff is made by General Electric up in Canada, New York State, places like that. But they're trying to make all the assembly processes happen here in this state. So I have a little video that I found online, and we'll see if I can show that to you. So I'm going to go to my my YouTube, and then we're gonna share the screen again, right? Okay, get this right. All right, I have to move this up so that, why can't I see the sharing the screen thing? Okay, okay, all right. So we're gonna share the screen with the YouTube video. And then we're gonna go to full screen, and then we're gonna...
Clean energy from offshore wind has the potential to generate nearly double the nation's current electricity use. Offshore wind turbines are taller than the Statue of Liberty and can be partially assembled at ports and then shipped out to the ocean vertically. These assembly ports, called marshalling ports, require locations with clear access to the sea, free from vertical restrictions, such as bridges, and with deep channels for the ships to navigate. A University of Delaware study has identified 2 prime East Coast locations for marshalling ports on either side of the Delaware Bay. With the scale of turbines growing even larger, these unique locations have the acreage, area, and access to support the infrastructure required for deploying offshore wind farms from Connecticut to the Carolinas.
So got a little visual there of what's happening with our ports and where it's located.
Yeah, that
And
worked.
then
Thank you.
I'm gonna go back to my slide presentation. Okay, let's see. Share it. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with this. So
So maybe I'll just remind people they can drop questions in the chat, and I'll try to facilitate getting questions to Denise at the end. We'll also have an opportunity to raise your hands and come off mute.
okay, so I'm not sharing right now, right?
You are not.
Okay. All right, so I gotta share first, and then okay, how are we doing?
That's better. We got it.
All right, so okay. So I promised a picture of a wind turbine. So a typical wind turbine is 800 feet high. Some of them are higher, but that's plenty high. So the different parts of a wind turbine include the blades, of course. They almost always have 3 blades. They capture the wind's energy and convert it to mechanical energy. And then you have your rotor hub in the center there, which supports the blades and determines the blade angle and rotation speed. Then you have the nacelle, and that houses the components that convert mechanical energy to electrical energy, which is the whole point of it, right? The tower, of course, supports everything, and then the foundation secures the turbine to the seafloor. And they tend to refer to them as monopiles, because there's only one pile, I guess. That's the wind turbine. So then we're going to talk about federal and state government roles, of which there are a lot. President Biden in November 2021 signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You've probably heard of it. It does include for support for offshore wind supply chain investments in the United States. And it also funds a variety of electrification initiatives and incentive programs. And then in June, there was a White House announcement specifically about offshore wind. It talks about how the administration joined with 11 governors from up and down the East Coast to launch a new federal state offshore wind implementation partnership. So they wanted to accelerate the wind industry, as well as providing Americans with clean energy, create jobs, and make investments in energy supply chains around manufacturing and shipbuilding. And you'll probably have noticed that the Biden administration has put a lot of focus on bringing manufacturing back to the United States from overseas, um, and doing more shipbuilding as well, because you may be aware there's a law that says, federally funded programs have to use um, ships that are flagged in the United States, and that can be an issue because we're not building enough ships. Um, so this was a great step forward to, as it says, kind of accelerated by having all the states on the East Coast work together on. And in addition to that, the federal government does have a major role in offshore wind development through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which we have usually called BOEM. Okay, and so they're a division of NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They have a large scientific staff. They do a lot of ocean and fisheries management studies. They do computer modeling. They do programs of research by in-person monitoring. So I went to an open house in Atlantic City a couple months ago, and I talked to some of these people that had poster presentations and stuff, and it was very interesting. They do a lot of work. And so their main role in offshore wind is to identify suitable areas for lease to developers who want to produce wind energy, or also do oil drilling. They're also involved in that. And so what they do is they solicit bids. And so these companies that want to do an offshore wind project will bid on it. And then the BOEM staff will award the bids for lease areas. So when I say they identify suitable areas for lease, so they actually have a map of the ocean and they do all their studies and they say, okay, well, it looks like this particular spot would be good for offshore wind because, maybe it doesn't have any birds migrating, or it doesn't have, a lot of whales that come back every year, or, things like that to make it kind of minimize the amount of conflict. And so BOEM also has a whole process, right, where they have to closely follow every stage of a project development to make sure that it meets all the environmental regulations. So this takes a long time. It takes like at least 6 years to even to 10 years to get through the whole process. And so there's milestones at each point, where they have to approve documentation and approve various things. So it's not easy to make it through this, but when they do, right, then you have a lot of confidence that it's been done right. So here is actually a little bit older map of lease areas. This is from several years ago, but it gives you an idea of how this works. So you can see on the left is the New Jersey coastline, and then up on the top is, I guess, Long Island. And so these different areas in purple and yellow and red are different lease areas that were made available for developers to put in offshore wind projects. And some of them didn't go through, some of them did, so the ones that are yellow, I guess, are the ones that actually made it through the process and were approved. And some of the other ones, like the purple ones, they kind of fell away, and now there's new ones coming in to replace them. And you can see where the it kind of becomes a darker medium blue on the right. That's where the continental shelf is. And then, just if people don't know, from 3 miles offshore to 200 miles offshore is federally managed property. So it's not state property off of the state of New Jersey. It's federal property once you get more than 3 miles out. So that's why the federal government is in charge of these lease areas. And the offshore wind projects are generally located between 10 miles offshore and 40 miles offshore. After that, pretty soon you get to the continental shelf, like I mentioned earlier, then it's too deep to put in the wind turbines. And also it's interesting to know that each project involves hundreds of turbines, like typically over 100 in each project. And if you look carefully at the little grid lines, you can see where they typically make it so like each one is a mile apart. So each turbine gets its own little 1 mile square. And then that helps when ships need to come through, you know, they have an idea of exactly how they can go through without hitting any turbines, right? And as I mentioned, there's a great deal of environmental monitoring and permitting. There's, first of all, the site assessment, which can take up to 5 years. And so the developers have to do these surveys and scientific studies to assess the impact. And then they'll have public hearings on the environmental impact statement, as they do for, you know, all environmental impact statements. And then BOEM, the Bureau of Energy and Ocean Management, has to approve their construction and operations plan. So remember I said earlier that Atlantic Shores has just recently made it through that approval. So that's a good milestone. And then the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities is also very involved in this in terms of they are doing a solicitation and approval process because the turbines are producing electricity, and then the electricity needs to go into the grid, and the Board of Public Utilities is in charge of managing the utilities that charge people money for electricity. So eventually they get to the point where their environmental impact statement is approved. And then alongside that, kind of in parallel, there's something called the New Jersey Research and Monitoring Initiative, which is a state-funded grant program for universities. So several of the universities in New Jersey are getting grants for their faculty to conduct research. So that way there's independent research in addition to the developers' research that can hopefully corroborate it or maybe add some additional insight, but would be objective data. A lot of people ask about mitigation methods in terms of the wildlife that lives in the sea. And so when they're doing the survey operations, you know, they're out there with a big ship and putting buoys in the water and so on and taking samples. So there's things called whale detection buoys that will tell you if there's a whale nearby. This is actually a human job, is onboard protected species observers. So there's people that are trained to be on board and let you know when there's whales or dolphins or turtles or birds or bats anywhere nearby. And you know, they have specific rules around, like, okay, if we see this, you know, we have to stop work for X amount of time until they're gone or something. And so they can do both at night and in the daytime, they can do this monitoring. They also have some acoustic monitoring that goes on, and they use several unmanned systems. So like they use gliders and drones and things like that that don't have any people on them. And another thing they do during construction is they have these things called bubble curtains. So they're, basically just like a curtain made out of water bubbles, and they keep the wildlife away from the turbine as it's being constructed and used. So, and that's just a sampling of things. There's other as well. Let's see, I hope I'm doing okay on time. I do want to talk a little bit about electricity and transmission issues. I did go to a webinar the other day that was given by the Department of Energy, which has something called a grid deployment office. So that was very educational. So first, to kind of give the background. So you hopefully are familiar with PJM, which is the manager of our electric grid for the Northeast United States. And New Jersey is currently developing a statewide plan for grid interconnection, which they're going to require the offshore wind developers to use. And so the idea is that rather than having all these different private developers, decide how they're going to put electricity in the grid and talking directly to PJM, they are going to go through the state using what they call a state agreement approach. So they're going to try to minimize the number of connection points on the coast and coordinate all the developers so that they are talking to each other and they, know when, how the interconnection to the grid is going to happen. And of course, having fewer connection points means less disruption to the people and the businesses and the land on the shore as the cables come in. And another thing that they're doing, which is really interesting, is they're trying to repurpose existing energy infrastructure. So we had a nuclear plant called BL England, which was decommissioned pretty recently. I think I remember maybe it was 2022 or 23. It was closed down, and so, but it has all the electric grid infrastructure so that we can bring the offshore wind cables to this plant, and then from there they can go into the grid, just like the nuclear energy used to go in the grid. So they are also using state-owned land. There's a thing called Green Acres sites, which is sort of a state preservation plan. These sites are owned by the state, and then they are used for, nature, passive recreation, that kind of thing. So there's a site like that in Atlantic City that they're going to use for connection to the grid. Or like I mentioned earlier, there's a National Guard training center at Seagirt, which they're going to use to bring the cable onto the grid sort of a little farther up the state than Atlantic City. So the grid modernization, I'm happy to say, is getting federal support, even though, as I mentioned, PJM is a private company that manages our grid, just like, there's other companies in other parts of the United States that manage the grid there. But the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act gave out $7.9 billion worth of grants for grid modernization projects in pretty much every state across the United States. And so they had utilities essentially applying for these grants so that they could do things like expand their capacity and become more resilient and do better interconnections. Reconductoring is about making the cables more modern so that they can carry more electricity. And so this grid deployment office is basically charged with catalyzing new and upgraded electric infrastructure. And they want to, for example, upgrading high capacity transmission lines is really important. So there's a lot of new technologies out there for electricity transmission, and we're able to get that into our grid through these grants from this department, which is part of the Department of Energy. So as you can see on the bottom, they act as a partner with states, tribes, territories, industries, communities, and other energy sector stakeholders to deploy solutions to lower energy costs and improve grid reliability and resilience. So that is a good thing. And so now, yes, hi.
If you could, sorry, if you could just shoot for maybe 5 more minutes, and then we need to get to some questions that have queued up here, okay?
Yep, sure. So just mention a little bit about the opposition to offshore wind. There is unfortunately quite a bit of opposition, which is mainly people who live at the shore. In a lot of cases, they have second homes at the shore. And the mayors of these various towns and local politicians. So they've come up with all kinds of stories about how there's going to be loss of tourism and higher electric rates and marine mammal deaths and so on. But a lot of this is actually coming through monetary support from fossil fuel interests. And a lot of investigative reporters in New Jersey have done some great work to kind of uncover where that came from and make that connection. So unfortunately, that means there's yard signs and road signs all over the Jersey Shore. If you've ever visited the Jersey Shore in the last couple of years, you've probably seen them. People are writing into the newspapers. There was even a congressional hearing. And when we've had rallies with the Sierra Club, there's been protesters. The first one we had last year was awful. There was like hundreds of protesters yelling at us through the entire thing. So for a while, there was an issue with whale and marine mammal deaths. And of course, people were saying, well, that's because of offshore wind. And we're like, but they haven't put the offshore wind in yet. It's still in the planning phase, So it seemed pretty crazy. But so it turned out they did some investigation. It turned out to really be boat strikes. And so we have a press release you can check out about that as well. And so they talk a lot about digging up the streets and pile driving, and they talk about the electromagnetic fields and so on. But this stuff has all really been totally it's been just kind of trying to put things out there, and then the balloon gets shot down, I guess we can say. So there's been a lot of advocacy by the Sierra Club, and we have a lot of environmental groups that we work with in the state. We have, as I mentioned, wind rallies. We go table places to, at local fairs, put out press releases. We do a lot of testimony at public hearings and, write to the legislature and so on. And it's keeping things going, but it's a fight. So, and as you know, with the new administration, and there may be some backtracking as well in terms of offshore wind. So I wanted to tell you a little bit. I don't know how much you know about this already, but there's a Mid-Atlantic Clean Hydrogen Hub, which is one of the projects that came out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And so this actually includes New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, or at least Eastern Pennsylvania. And so they're going to be developing this clean hydrogen hub. And it's going to involve, new jobs and clean energy and so on, but there's pros and cons to it. So a lot of it in New Jersey is trying to keep the infrastructure, the pipelines and the plants and so on that were originally put in for fossil fuels to keep them operating and keep people employed. And that's the same in Pennsylvania. You know, there's a lot in Eastern Pennsylvania, pipelines and so on, and refineries. And so possibly this is a good step, you know, first step, a baby step towards clean energy. But as I said, there's pros and cons to it. So I wanted to finish up the presentation by giving you some suggestions for what Pennsylvania can do around clean energy. First of all, know that you have the Green Amendment in your state. You're probably aware of this, but if you're not, I'm happy to tell you more about it. Definitely encourage your state leadership to develop renewable energy goals, as the state of New Jersey did, because that's made a huge difference in terms of getting the work kind of off the ground and going. Push for Pennsylvania to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which they're like one of the few states on the East Coast that is not a part of it. Or another option would be developing a community solar program. And definitely try to learn more about this Mach 2, the hydrogen program. It has some benefits, it has some dangers. So I think this Pennsylvania club needs to, you know, be involved and know about it. And of course, I encourage you to take a public position against fracking and LNG trains. And perhaps you already do that as well. So that is my presentation, and I am ready for questions and answers. So shall I stop sharing my screen then?
Yeah, why don't you stop and we'll have this
Okay.
conversation. Let me scroll back to get the first questions. Thank you all for contributing a few questions. Yeah, if we can just go quickly through these as best we can. We've got about, I think, 10 questions, Denise.
Okay.
Why are the wind turbines so high? And how long do they last? Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I don't really know why they're so high. It's an interesting question. I mean, when you see onshore wind turbines, they're always that high too, right? I've seen a lot of them around the country. Um, it, I guess to get advantage of the wind that flows at that level, right? As far as that's all I can think of.
I think it's economy of scale, having a longer turbine blade, so you'd need a higher stand.
Okay. Yeah,
Dale
that's fair.
asks about, Dale asks about the project that's being built off the coast of Surf City, New Jersey. Do you know which particular that one is?
I don't. Is that near the? I mean, it could be the one that's near Seagirt. I guess I'm.
Long Beach Island.
Oh, Long Beach Island. Yeah. So, yeah. So the one that right now that is the farthest along is the one that connects at Atlantic City. And that seems to be the one that's getting a lot of opposition from the folks in Long Beach Island.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Is
that's
that
Atlantic Shores is what it's called.
sure? And how
Yeah.
far along are they with that one?
They're starting at like 9 miles offshore and going out to like 12 or 15 miles. Cause like I said, they're like spaced apart, like a mile apart, and
Right.
there's like over 100 of them. So
Yeah, Denise, what does a turbine look like that's 9 miles offshore when I'm standing on the beach, right?
if it's a clear day, you would see a very tiny thing, you know, like just it would look like a couple inches high and you know in your vision. If it's farther than that, you wouldn't see it at all. The oil bearing ships are much more visible and much closer to shore.
Yeah, that's true too. Or bananas down there. Just bananas about it.
Yeah, I know.
So now for the elephant question,
Mm-hmm.
Denise, what could the Trump administration do to affect these projects? So you mentioned that they're on federal land, right? Could he close these, could his administration close these areas for this use?
I mean, I don't think so. I think it depends on how far along they are in the process. I mean, some of the ones that are still early on could end up like not getting approved because they could put pressure on the government agencies to not approve them. But the ones that have already gotten through the federal government approval process, I don't think are gonna get canceled or anything. I think it's more a question of like, you know, we'll lose momentum, right? Like there'll be some that still go in, but then we won't be having like an acceleration of more and more projects over the next few years. It'll maybe fall back and we won't have any new projects for a while, until he gets out of office or whatever. I don't think that he could cancel them like on his own though.
And you see, the part that the state plays in it, that New Jersey plays in it, that's going to be completely supportive.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think that it's likely that our next governor will be Democratic as well. So I think from the state point of view, things will continue to go well. And from the federal government, I mean, I talked a lot about how there's so many steps that they have to go through and take so many years to, get all the permits and all that. So in some ways that's an advantage because, once you've got the ball rolling, you can't just, stop it that easily because it's like this huge bureaucratic process, right? But yeah, I mean, you never know, but it does seem like it would be pretty hard to stop an existing project.
Okay, thanks. And then you talked a little bit about this, but let me ask it again. After the turbines are in place, are there some positive and some negative impacts on sea life?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's too many negative impacts because they're gonna situate them so that they have minimal impact, and that the sea life primarily stays away. And that's one of the things that bubble curtain does is it discourages marine mammals from coming too close. And there are
That's during
some,
construction.
what's that?
That's during construction. I meant after all the turbines are in place.
Right. Well, there is a lot of talk that the the bottom of the pile where it meets the ocean floor is a good place for like scallops and clams and that kind of thing, that want to kind of burrow in the seafloor. So they might choose that as a home. Um, and I think that the various mitigation measures will continue. Like I don't think when it's fully constructed that they're going to necessarily stop. And the like the people from the federal government are going to continue to do their studies and let us know if there's an issue. Like a lot of the issues lately have been like because of climate change that migration patterns and feeding patterns of animals have changed, and so that's something that I think they're going to be keeping an eye on. And letting people know if that becomes an issue, then they might have to implement like increasing types of mitigation that they didn't think of originally.
So there are existing offshore wind farms on the East Coast, right? In Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but they're not on the West Coast because the continental shelf drops off too quickly. Is that correct?
Well, they're getting a late start, but I think there are going to be some on the West Coast. So it's not completely impossible, but I think it's not as good as the East Coast for what you say for the continental shelf dropping off more quickly. There's still some places that I think will have offshore wind though.
Okay. And for the ones on the East Coast or just the projects that are ahead of New Jersey, are there lessons learned? Is New Jersey learning from, like the Block Island farm and stuff?
I don't know, they probably talk to each other, but I don't know for sure that they do, because I'm not involved in that. I know that there's been the whole thing with General Electric with their, blade manufacturing issues and have one of them like fell off and broke, and, so they're having to kind of revisit that. So I'm sure that the New Jersey folks are aware of that and are kind of keeping an eye on General Electric to make sure they fix their manufacturing process.
Right. I just wondered maybe in terms of spacing or anything that has impacts on fishing and stuff. All right. Sydney asks about the variability of renewables of wind, in this case, wind, right? Is there any talk about matching the wind with energy storage in New Jersey?
I haven't heard a lot about that. I mean, that does seem like something that's becoming more popular, energy storage. People are definitely moving from like the research stage to the implementation stage, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. I imagine it will be, over the next 10 years, I think we'll probably be hearing more about that.
Okay, thanks. What else do we have? There was some discussion in the chat about cables getting caught in either fishing lines or boat anchors. And somebody contributed that the lines are actually buried underground, even though they're at
Yeah,
the bottom of the sea.
yeah, definitely. They're definitely buried underground. I don't imagine that they would get tangled up with anything. And even when they come on shore, they're still buried underground. I believe at least 6 feet underground, if not more.
Okay. I think that's all I see in the chat. Is there anybody want to come off mute and make a comment or ask a question of Denise? Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. The Nature Conservancy had an excellent program on October 10th that they recorded regarding the research that BOEM has been doing with bird populations and migration issues, not only on the East Coast, but on the Gulf and on the West Coast too. So I'm just suggesting that people look that up, the Nature Conservancy, because they've done a lot of on the puffins,
Tell us the bottom line, Dale.
water.
Tell us
What?
the bottom line. Was the Nature Conservancy concerned about it or supportive?
Oh, very supportive of the monitoring, all the monitoring that's being done by, various environmental groups have been contacted, by BOEM to help them to learn about issues related to the birds. Yeah, it was very positive, I thought. But you're right, that
Okay.
it's related to climate change, changing everything, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen.
Anybody else?
Jim, this is John. I saw an article from the Department of Energy why the wind turbines are so big, and its title was "Bigger the Better." So I put the link in there, and shout out to Denise. That was a very good presentation. It was well organized, good flow, a lot of information you covered. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, John. There are a couple of links in the chat. I'll include them in my follow-up email. Let me just finish up and give another plug for the remaining programs and the fall webinar series. Next week is actually a double header. At lunchtime, we're going to have a zero waste presentation with the longest, the deep dive there is on microplastics in our bodies with Carol Armstrong. And then in the evening is a session about air quality monitoring and the purple air monitors. Then on November 21st is telling stories about fracking in Western Pennsylvania that the Dirty Energy team is hosting, inviting speakers from the Center for Coalfield Justice. And finally, on December 5th, the electric vehicle miss that myself and Howard are going to be contributing. Oh, and Brian is on this call too. So thank you for that. I'll share the recording and the links to everybody that registered, and also be posted on the conservation team pages. And you can always find stuff like this as well as other stuff that the chapter does on the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Denise.